Hi, I'm Heather, and welcome to my backyard potted garden. I used to have a bigger garden. It was a city block long garden about a block away from where we live. And it was completely abandoned, but my landlord owns it and let us garden in it. I lost access to this garden this year because of the quarantine and because our neighborhood isn't the safest. We just decided to limit going out there this year. I might not have access to the garden this year, but I took a lot of video last year, so come take a look at my old garden with me. Hi, I'm Heather, and welcome to the artist garden. So let's go walk on through it. There are peas growing over here. And then here are some rows of flowers that will be blooming soon. Welcome to the soon-to-be tomato garden. Here's a little anemone opening up. So this is kind of what I have going on right now. Lots of lettuces. Planted a little herb garden. Here's my little fountain. There's some roses growing. Oh, this is gonna be beautiful in a day or two. Now, the garden is still out there. It's just dormant right now. So it's not something that I'm really going out to. I'll probably go out there like once a month to check it and just see if there's anything blooming or anything that I can harvest. I know there's rhubarb out there right now, so I'm hoping to get out there soon and get some rhubarb. One of the things that we did to make my life a little bit better was to create this potted garden. I have a bunch of pots that I pulled out of the artist garden. Erin filled them up with soil, 11 5-gallon buckets full of soil from the garden, and then we filled up all of the pots and planted some things. I also took some plants from the garden. I took my strawberries, my peonies, and more strawberries, and then also we had this lilac bush that I actually never planted last year. I planted things like the beets and radishes. I also planted some cilantro, but it hasn't quite come up yet, so I see a couple cilantro maybe poking out, but we'll see. I also planted a bunch of lettuce back here. When we went out to the garden, I took one of my favorite plants ever. I took my peonies out of the garden and we planted them here. So the peonies came from our wedding 4 years ago, and I planted these and grew the flowers and used the flowers in my bouquet. So these peonies are very, very special to us. I didn't want them to get stolen out of the garden, so I decided to save them. And I'm so looking forward to them blooming again this year. They have a beautiful color. They're this like magenta color that is just gorgeous. And they usually bloom around the end of May, which is really nice. We also have this wonderful lilac bush that hasn't bloomed yet, and I'm hoping it will this year. So this will be the first year that if it blooms, it would be amazing. We used to have landscapers and they chopped it down. So they chopped it all the way to the ground, so it kind of grew up like this. So I'm hoping that it will bloom this year. This would be the first year that it would bloom, and it looks like it has some buds on it. But I can't really be sure because I've never grown lilacs before. So I'm very, very curious to see what happens with that. We also have strawberries. So we're gonna have some strawberries this year. I have 2 different strawberry plants that I actually planted last year in the artist garden. I had about 15 strawberry plants and I decided to save 2 of them for the backyard garden because I figured it'd be nice to have fresh strawberries when they start blooming and then creating fruit anytime we want, so that way I don't have to worry about having to go out to the garden and run really fast to pick through the strawberries. I can get these whenever they come up. I planted some beets and the beets are coming up, which I'm very, very excited about. So I wasn't sure if they were coming up. They were really slow to start this year. I planted everything before we had snowfalls. We actually had 2 snowfalls in the past month, and I planted everything on April 1st, which I know is really early to be planting things, but these were all cold hardy plants, so I figured I could get away with it. So the beets and then the radishes over here. The radishes are really coming up. I'm very, very excited about these. I planted these radishes on the April 1st date, and actually Aaron did all of the planting, which was super nice of him. I'm not really supposed to be touching soil because there's different soil-borne diseases that pregnant women can get, so I decided to just play it safe and not touch soil. So the radishes that I planted are coming up really nicely. I'm really hoping to have radishes to roast up. That is my favorite way to eat them, in about a month from now. They're really quick to grow, and I should be harvesting the leaves even to cook with in a couple weeks, which would be really nice. We've been kind of lacking on fresh food here. We get a produce box every week filled with fresh things, but we've been staying away from lettuce. We just don't really want to chance it, so even though you can wash it, we decided to just play it safe. So back here I have a whole bin that I filled up with salad leaves. So this is a bin that I took from our studio and I repurposed it. It was cracked in the bottom and kind of a bad tote. And so Aaron filled it up with soil with me, and we planted it with 4 different types of lettuce in there. I'm not really sure what I planted at this point. I know there's a couple different Italian type of lettuces. I think there's some red lettuce in there, and I know I planted wasabi arugula, which wasabi arugula, if you've never had it, is really tasty. So it has this sharp bitterness to it and tastes like wasabi. Last week, Aaron also helped me plant some Daikon radishes and some Icelandic poppies. Icelandic poppies are one of my favorite flowers. They have this beautiful pod that opens up and just kind of pops open, which is so cool to watch. Behind me here, we have Daikon radishes and also Icelandic poppies that I planted last week with Aaron's help. So the first thing I did was I gathered some buckets and then I drilled out holes in the buckets. So I drilled out 5 or 6 holes in each bucket just so that way it would have some good drainage. I filled up the buckets with soil, and then with the Icelandic poppies, I just scattered the seeds on top. So Icelandic poppies really like sunlight to germinate, and they take about 20 days to germinate. So if you don't see them quite at first, don't give up hope yet. They might actually still come up. The Daikon radishes we covered with a 1/2 inch of soil. They do not want light to germinate, so we covered them up and I watered them in deeply, and hopefully they will start sprouting here in about 10 days from now. So even if you have a small backyard, there's tons of things you can do with it. I put everything in pots, that way it's easily movable and we could have something growing this year. We took a lot of pots that we already had from the garden, but we also took and made a garden out of pots that I didn't even know I had. We like to use things that are cheap or free that we have laying around our studio. Since we're artists, we tend to repurpose a lot of things. Thanks for joining me on my backyard potted garden tour.